So what about music that makes us people fall so in love with it? The artists behind it, the festivals, bringing family and friends together, make us feel good, right? Or sad? Will the song remind you of the first time you were in love? And a time you were mourning over deceased relatives? Or that one album you could just play with no skills, all on a long road trip? It was just that damn good. Gives you ultimate vibes on a higher vibration. Some of us like to enhance our experiences with drugs to give us everything out of a moment in a song, raising vibrations, pleasing our electromagnetic waves to our eardrums. The human body is very unique because it's so reactive. Our five senses are our makeup. So what all of this mean? It's the sound. The sound of music gives us everything. It motivates, it uplifts, it molds us. It gives us our distinct personas, subconsciously moving us, one instrument, one beat, one song at a time. So let's take a trip down memory lane and go back, all the way back to 1877 when Thomas Edison invented the phonograph.
Hello, hello, hello. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow.
The playback medium was a cylinder made of tinfoil in shape. And later on, Emil Berliner changed that in 1888 by creating a flat disc to be on what's called the gramophone. Over a period through several decades, when listening to music and sound playback, these records became standardized at a speed of approximately 78 RPM and in sizes of 10 and 12 inches in diameter. The largest one usually for a long play of classical music. Shout out to Beethoven for that, keeping the functions going back then. So let's jump forward into the 20th century. Vinyl records were first introduced in 1930 by RCA Records. These records were noted for their low quality playback in 1931. The RCA Victor Company introduced an early version of the long playing record, but ultimately it failed to catch on because all but dead by 1933. The Great Depression and World War II was placed in pause to this invention to be recognized. I mean, who's worried about record players when you're jobless, your wife left you, and half the world got beef with each other? After several years later in research, in March 1949, RCA Victor introduced his own microgrove vinyl system.
It was hard not to be musical and be alive in New York City.
The 7-inch disc that played at a set 45 RPM that became normalized for record labels to use for a few years. In 1952, the extended play 45, which became known as the EP, were introduced to replace those large boxes of 45.
Collected records when I was a kid. I actually had a record player in my car back in the 50s when nobody had one of those.
But once again, those EPs really sparked as far as the physical records. Even though some Elvis Presley EPs were huge sellers in 1956, most labels phased out of EP releases by the earliest 1960s. Those Capitol released as Beatles EPs in 1965, and RCA issued one last Elvis Presley EP in 1967. So when those cool kids went to the diner after school, went to the jukebox and jammed out to their favorite tunes. Thus far, you can see how vinyl records were on anyone's top of their Christmas list, but not until the next innovation. The next innovation in records was the stereo disc. Stereo recording became some films as early as 1939, and by 1954, several record labels were recording in stereo. Reel-to-reel stereo tapes were sold before stereo records were because there were several competing ideas on how to make stereo records.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to present our dancers with their interpretation of the nitty-gritty.
So whether it was old-fashioned shindig, a school dance, radio playback, this stereo defined a time for the audience to enjoy sound and music.
I had always been with vinyl, okay, because that's all we had, but it was in the early 70s in Boston that I really discovered vinyl.
Here's Wonder Mike, Hank, and Master G, the Sugar Hill Gang.
In the 1970s, the quadraphonic sound failed to pass because of competing format. Other techniques included half-speed mastering and metal mastering, or attempts to improve the stereo sound.
In the 70s and 80s was a whole nother era, man.
When vinyl records became more scratched, rapped, and dirty, this had an era of DJs or disc jockeys that took over the scene, mixing and mastering recorded audio.
Like, this was when you were your own setup for your equipment. And there was live equipment. There was no get the computer, get the engineer right. You perform it. You got your instrumentation. You hook up your guitar. You hook up your drum set. It's a show, man. It was a performance.
Because vinyl records has become scratched, rapped, dirty over, format slowly took over. 8-track and cassette tapes were introduced in 1960s.
It was cassettes. I gotta say that first. I grew up on tapes. From the time up until I was about 12 or 13, you know, it was cassettes. CDs were crazy expensive.
By the mid-1980s, more cassettes than vinyl records were sold. So you can imagine the whole b-boy era with the breakdancing, leather gloves, and jerry curl kids. Pulling up to the scene with your boombox and cassette tapes full of electronic funk rap instrumentals. In 1982, the digital compact disc came to the market and suspended both cassettes and LPs by 1991.
For us, it was just more opportunity in New York because all the artists were there. All the record labels were there. You could go out and you could run into artists in the clubs, you could run into artists on the streets.
So this created a whole new wave of portable tunes with the arm's reach. No winding up, trying to put tapes back together.
When I heard my first CD, I thought, man, nobody will buy this.
The CD was a staple when it comes to the mixtape era.
I used to wait on mixtapes. I used to have to wait on my homeboys to come back from New York, where they recorded Hot 97 and WBLS. And then we would dub the tapes and send them around the neighborhood.
Sound was better, holding more song. It revolutionized the whole game of music. Getting into more the techno world with the internet era became a norm in society.
Which the business came in and changed that whole art form.
As far as the world of hip-hop goes, this became a huge staple with the artists pushing out music with the streaming era. In the early 2000s, imagine reaching millions of folks with just a click of a button of a link, filled with MP3 files of your music around the world. Incredible, right?
And in here, we probably got 300,000 or 400,000.
Like thousands of records.
My collection of 15,000 pieces of vinyl that I collected over the years.
So we have a nice history thus far with vinyls and record playing and how with the age became a revolution of how we view music and sound. So what did all of this mean? Did music just become some sort of figurative place of sound? Or has it become better and accessible for all? With the lost art comes with a revolution of history behind it, but we must have a generation of people to tell the history.
The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Whoever deals with the art, they get their opinion about what the art is. And that opinion is oftentimes based on who they are as people.